Morning now is recruiting new riders. And as you saw from Rob Quintas' presentation, we actually have seen an uptick in transit ridership. The question is, how do we accelerate that? And we're going to talk about a variety of things in terms of route redesign, technology, and other tools to move on that. So, Michael, if you could start down and just do a 30-second name, rank, and serial number, and then we can introduce our keynote.
Mike Sanders, Transit Administrator, DOT. Read the biography.
There we go.
Doug Outslayton, Director of Transportation, Traffic, and Parking, City of New Haven. I was hired by Tony Harp, our mayor who was just elected last year. I'd like to read a quick quote from Tony the week before I was hired. Transportation is a civil rights issue. It's a jobs issue. It is a human issue. And my phone keeps tweeting and stuff, so you can imagine the rest. And you can search the New Haven Independent for the rest of the quote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Holcomb with Greater Bridgeport Transit. I'm the general manager there. Before that, I was the director of planning and service development for about 13 years.
Great. And I'm Lyle Ray, Capital Region Council of Governments Executive Director. We have a number of people here from CROG, Jennifer Carrier in our Transportation Department and others. Our presenter is not on the outline here, which is not good. Christoph Spieler is in Houston talking to us today about a very important aspect of system reimagining in the 5-year transit service design going on in Houston, which I think embodies the kind of work that was alluded to a few minutes ago, which is what do we do about our route structure. In this region, we have a year-long process that's just gotten underway, starting at looking at our route redesign. And one of the things that I think is exciting is that rapid transit is an opportunity to straighten out some of the kinky routes over the long haul, but we'll talk about that. So let's see if we have Christoph here ready to roll.
Can you see my presentation
we
here?
Sure can. Looks great.
Okay.
Please take it away. Thank you.
I will get started then. I am very happy to be talking to you today, and sorry to have to do it remotely. So you'll just have to bear with us that I'm not there in person. I wish I could be.
Out of order.
But I want to start by telling you a little bit about Houston and where we came from here. But I think you'll soon see very quickly that there's a lot of commonalities between what we're dealing with and what Connecticut is dealing with right now. So I'll start by a basic geographical comparison. The Houston total metro area is about 6.3 million people. We're about the 9th largest metro area in the United States. The Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County, which I'm a board member for, covers about 3.4 million of those, almost exactly the same population as Connecticut. We have about 1,200 buses, 37 light rail vehicles, about 280,000 average weekday boardings on our fixed routes. You can also see a bit of a geographic comparison here, our metro service area compared to the size of Connecticut. The major difference between the two, of course, is you have a lot of very significant metropolitan areas near you. Our nearest big one is Dallas, which is about the same distance as Hartford to Philadelphia as Dallas to Houston. So we're very much more isolated in our surroundings than you are, and related to fewer surrounding transit systems. So I am actually very lucky to have a very great transit commute. You can see in this picture here the building that I live in, the building that I work in, and the train that I'm able to take to get between the two of those. I've got about a 10-block commute. Can do it reliably from my bedroom to my desk in about 15 minutes. This is the perfect world of transit, and I wish more people were in it, but that's not the transit most people experience. This is the bus I took to work before I took my current job, the Metro number 9. Very typical American local bus route. Runs about every 30 minutes peak, maybe every 45 minutes off-peak. It's just your typical local bus. And it was a great experience to ride, but at the same time, I realized the shortcomings of it. That you have to plan your life around that transit, when it works and when it doesn't. And I kept thinking to myself that we could do better. And the numbers indicate the same thing. Here's what our ridership was looking like when we started this process. You can see a long-term drop-off in local bus ridership. Our park and ride buses looked great, light rail ridership looked great, but long-term drop-off in how many people were riding our local bus service. And you might think that has something to do with service cuts, but it doesn't, because the blue line shows how much service we were putting on the street. So we were putting more service on the street and carrying fewer people with it. So the basic question is, why aren't more people riding the bus? And I think there are some fairly universal answers to that. The first is that most of those bus routes are infrequent. So that if you look at the Washington Avenue corridor in Houston, for example, during peak hours you get a bus every 10 or 15 minutes. But by the time you get to early afternoon, it's a bus an hour. Late evening drops off dramatically as well. This is typical for a lot of routes. And frequency is absolutely critical to transit. If you have a bus, say, every 15 minutes or better, you don't have to plan your life around transit. You can just show up to the stop and know that a bus will be along without you having to look at a schedule. If it runs less frequently than that, your life is at the mercy of that transit schedule. So here's our current system. Red are routes that run every 15 minutes or better, those routes where you don't have to look at the schedule. Blue is 16 to 30-minute headways, and green is 31 minutes or more. Most of those are 45-minute or hourly routes. So you can see a very large number of routes, but very few of those routes are frequent. And again, I think that's pretty typical if you look across the United States. And when you look at that system, it's really intimidating because it's a really confusing system. One of my favorite examples in Houston here is this is a single street, Shepherd, with the number of bus routes it would take to travel the length of that street. So you can see there's a pair of routes numbered in different numbers depending on whether you're northbound or southbound on the southern segment. Then there's another route that takes it over from a little bit from there, another route there, a gap in the street, another route. As a driver, as somebody who lives in Houston, you visualize this as one long street that's a continuous entity. But for the transit system, it's a confusing mess. And even if you look at those individual routes, they can be really hard to understand. This is our current route number 40. You can see at the upper left, 2 different branches going to 2 places. Downtown is in the center there. Out of downtown, there's a couple of express runs every day that skip about half the route out from there. It's one of those moments where if you get on the wrong bus, your day is completely ruined if it speeds past the neighborhood you thought you were going to. And then at the southern end, 3 different looped branches running in different directions on the same street. I have not yet actually been able to fully decipher that service pattern at the bottom. This is a real mess. If you ride the same bus every day, you can understand this route, but if your pattern is different every day, this is an incredibly difficult system to decipher. Another example, here's bus route patterns in downtown Houston. Each color is not a single route, it's multiple routes on the same service pattern. And even if you look at buses coming from the same place, they're landing on different streets in downtown. So it's really hard to navigate this system. And if you can navigate it, it's often incredibly indirect. Here's an example for a trip that's just down a single street, little over a mile, 3 different buses to make that trip, simply because the system is so roundabout. Another example of connections that don't work very well. This is the northwest portion of our service area. And notice these branches that don't quite meet at the ends. Look at that number 45 and number 46 in the middle. And look at how long a trip it would take to get between the 2 of them because they don't meet on the outside ends. And that service gets a lot worse when you get to weekends. Here's what our network looks like 5 days a week, midday, weekday. Here's what that looks like on Saturday. Here's what that looks like on Sunday. You see almost all of the frequent routes drop to infrequent, and you can see entire routes drop off the system. This system was designed in a world where the assumption was that everybody worked 9 to 5, 5 days a week. But there's 2 huge problems with that. The first is, if you're dependent on transit, you're dependent on transit for everything. That means getting to the store on a Sunday morning, too. So if the bus isn't there for you to take you to all those other things besides work, you can't rely on transit. And the second is, there's somebody working at that store. There's a lot of service jobs that aren't 9 to 5, and very few transit systems are good at serving those jobs. And if you look at the system structure, it fundamentally doesn't go where people really need to go. If you overlay where our frequent routes are to where our greatest population density is, you'll see that a lot of the areas we now have the highest density of people aren't well served by the system. These are areas that have grown over the last couple of decades, and the system has not adjusted to serve them. And the same thing is dramatically true for employment. This is downtown Houston right here. It's incredibly well served by the transit system. We have great commuter buses. The people who work in downtown Houston and live around those park and ride lots, over half of them choose to ride the bus to work. So we get really good modal share here. But other employment centers, Houston is a multi-centric city, just like Connecticut is a multi-centric state, and these other employment centers aren't served nearly as well. This is Uptown and Greenway. These are as big as a typical Houston downtown, but they aren't served by our system the way downtown is because, once again, these have developed over the last couple of decades. They haven't been there for a century. And so if you look at how many people ride the system, downtown Texas Medical Center, we get a third of the people riding. You get to Uptown Greenway, we're 5%, 7%. And that's simply because the system wasn't designed to serve those areas. The demand is there, but the system isn't supporting it. So you look at all of this and you wonder, after I've shown you this, who would ever design a system like that? And the answer is pretty simple, and I think I can tell it to you anecdotally. This is one of my favorite examples in Houston, the number 11 Nance bus route. This bus route started out in the 1920s as a streetcar line. It was the Nance streetcar. On this map, you will see the route of that streetcar, and highlighted in yellow, you will see Nance Street. And so this is a very logical route with a very logical name. It's named Nance because the majority of the route is on Nance. Here is that route today. Along the way, it got extended at the outside end, diverted to catch a couple of destinations, and then when the interstate highway system was built, Nance was disconnected, so the route was actually taken off of the inside part of Nance, leaving it on only a couple of blocks of the street that hardly anybody knows about. But the name is still there. Why is this? It's simply because this is a route that has grown, adapted. It's based on history. It's simply a historical accident that the route is named what it is today, a sort of hand-me-down from history rather than a real reflection of the route today. And you end up with a lot of routes like that. Here's our Route 60. It's about 8 minutes by foot between those two spots and 20 minutes in a one-seat bus ride, not counting waiting time. Who would ever design such a route? The answer is nobody would design that route from scratch. But if you give transit planners the directive to serve new destinations or extend service and tell them to change the system as little as possible, this is what you get. Each incremental step makes sense. Once again, your goal is to add something with as little change as possible. But as you add those incremental steps on top of each other, the system gets more and more Byzantine and makes less and less sense with every step. And just like you do, we had a great opportunity here. We have one light rail line that's been in operation for about 11 years now, one that we opened last year, 2 more that we're going to open next year. So by April, we're going to have 23 miles of light rail. And if you look at our system, here's a map of that system, and in orange are all of the bus routes that intersect with those rail lines outside of downtown. This is a huge opportunity. When you set up this kind of high-quality, high-frequency spine service, you don't need to duplicate it with bus routes. We can rely on that light rail to feed people into downtown and think about those bus routes connecting different destinations, setting up cross-town service, and really seeing that as an integrated network. So rather than simply trying to, once again, tweak the bus network as little as possible to tie into rail, there's an opportunity to really rethink what the bus network does. And so we started a project with a pretty radical question, which is, what would our local bus network look like if we redesigned it from a blank sheet? Not tried simply to simplify, but said, let's redesign the entire system. And we based that process on 2 really important ideas. The first is data. We have a lot of data about who's riding. You can see the dots on this map represent our GPS fare boxes counting people getting on the bus. So there's a lot of data there. And with GIS and census data, we have a lot of data about where people live and where people work. So rather than design a system based on people's assumptions or on traditional travel patterns, we can base it on the data of what we know about where people are and where they want to go. And the second thing we based this process on was intense stakeholder involvement. You're seeing a room here full of stakeholders representing all of the reasons why people ride transit. You have community college systems in the room, you have hospitals, you have advocates for low-income communities, you have management districts, you have employers, all working together to really resolve the fundamental issues of transit. And that stakeholder committee has been part of this process all the way through. So where did that get us to? Here's our existing network. So once again, red are those frequent routes, the ones that you don't have to look at a schedule in order to ride them. Current network, proposed network. So here's current again, and here's proposed. Notice how much more of that red routes we have right there. What's remarkable about this is the same number of buses, the same number of operating hours as our current network. It's simply getting all the inefficiencies out of that network in order to deploy that service more effectively. And peak hour service looks even better than that. So if we just focus on that frequent network, here, once again, current frequent network, entirely radial, centered on downtown, new frequent network, really setting up a grid across a large portion of the area, really covering all of the dense parts of Houston with a two-way grid of routes. And what's great about a grid is it doesn't presuppose where you're going to. It doesn't assume that everyone's going downtown, because any 2 points on this grid are reasonably easily connected. So for example, if you're in the Montrose neighborhood of Houston, you have 3 of those frequent routes going through that neighborhood. With one connection on just frequent routes, you can hit this much of the region. Greenway Plaza, same thing. You're on a single route here, that route connects to all of these routes. Same comparison here, Memorial City. And so you can see how that grid works. The idea is build a grid to set up connections. And a connection from one frequent bus to another is painless. You know you will wait no more than 15 minutes to make that connection. And in the process, we can make the network a lot easier to understand. Here's that example again of Shepherd, Old Shepherd on the left, New Shepherd on the right. A single bus route that runs the entire length of the street. A very simple system to understand. We can set up those crosstowns to make those previously really difficult trips really easy. This trip right here I showed you, that becomes a single seat ride on the new system. That outer end I showed you where the routes didn't connect, we connect those up so that those all line up, and as a full grid, you can travel between all of those places. Downtown, old system structure downtown, new system structure downtown. Old system structure for the Washington Avenue routes, new structure. So you can see the whole system becomes much easier to use. It's a system that's easy to navigate even if you don't make the same trip every day. And in the process, we serve a lot more people and connect them to a lot more jobs with high quality service. If you look at that frequent service, those 15-minute routes, 111% increase in the number of people living within walking of that service, and a 55% increase in the number of jobs. It's 1 million people and 1 million jobs. Anybody can find a place they can afford within that service area. Also, much better weekend service. Here's again is current Saturday, current Sunday. Here's proposed Sunday service. We are saying that every route runs 7 days a week, and the service on Sunday morning is exactly the same service as midday on a weekday. So what that does is it goes from 25% of our riders' current boarding location being served by frequent service 7 days a week to 75%, dramatically improving the system for our current riders. And notably, 93% of current boardings can get on at exactly the same stop they do today, and only 0.5% of current boardings are more than a quarter mile away from a new stop. So very high positive benefits here, very low negative impacts. And we can also make trips faster for nearly everyone who's riding today. We analyzed trips between 30 different destinations in the service area. 28% of those trips get faster by 20 minutes or more. 58% faster by 10 minutes or more. We do that by getting rid of a lot of these deviations. This one, it turns out, exists because that street was under construction once to replace a sewer pipe and they never put it back. This kind of detour, which picks up maybe 1 or 2 people but inconveniences 20 people to do it, is all over the system. So by simplifying the routes, we can really speed up trips that way. And we're also really speeding up trips by not forcing people through downtown Houston as if it were a gigantic transit center. Right now in red, every one of those routes goes into downtown. So we're really feeding people into downtown in order to send them back out. And that costs a lot of time. Here's a sample trip. Current trip, you're going out of your way to get to downtown to make that bus transfer. New trip, we set up that transfer at a suburban transit center. It goes from an 89-minute trip to a 50-minute trip. That's 39-minute time savings one way. Multiply that by 2, multiply that by 5, and you can see what that does to somebody's life. So setting up these transfer hubs is huge. And we also focused on reliability. One of our biggest problems is freight rail crossings. And so we designed the system to cross freight rail lines less. About 30% decrease in the number of times a day a bus will cross a freight rail line at grade. And we also got rid of some of the longest routes that had the greatest performance impacts, where delays on one part of the system trickle through to another part. So really focusing on that reliability. And this plan, we think, really has the ability to build to future growth. There's the ability to dial up frequency on those routes. There's the ability to improve travel times with limited stop services. And there's the ability to expand the network on the outside end or insert new lines into the grid. So with this kind of fundamental reimagining of the network, we're not going to have to go through this exercise again. So what we're looking at here is a system with simpler, more frequent service 7 days a week. We're looking at a ridership increase of probably 20% within 2 years using current resources. Much better match with where people live and work today, much stronger connections between bus and rail, and a strong foundation to move forward. So we've been at this for a while. We essentially have a finalized plan. We're working through the final tweaks with the community now, and we're looking to roll this out in June. And I look at this, and what I really see here is freedom. Those frequent routes, those represent a zone with which you can travel seamlessly without having to worry about schedules. This is the zone of freedom you have as a transit rider. And here's what that looks like today. And slide mishap here. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties right here. A second here. Sorry, these slides just aren't showing properly. But the point is, you're setting up this zone that sets up a frequent network where you can get to everywhere within that zone whenever you want to go. And the amount of opportunity that means for people is awesome. This is really a system that's about giving people more economic opportunity, more jobs they can travel to. It's about giving people more educational opportunity, more places where they can pick up new skills and pick up new jobs. It's really a system that's about freedom. And I want to close out with one final note, which is the key is not only the size of that zone, but it's what's within that zone. And that's where we as a transit agency really need to focus on working with all of our partners to get that right. The experience isn't just the bus stop itself. The experience is what happens after you get off of that bus stop, and what's the experience of getting from that bus stop to your final destination. But looking at this, I think you can see the opportunity that rethinking a local bus network really offers, the opportunity we have to make millions of people's lives better every day. Once again, you're talking about a plan here where we can increase our weekday boardings by about 40,000 without additional resources. That's excellent bang for the buck. And so I would encourage you to do what we have done and really focus on that local bus network and take advantage of this opportunity that you have. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and here's also my Twitter handle, email, and the website where you can learn more about the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph. We're going to go down our row of panelists. You're welcome to join us and stay if you can. Otherwise, we very much appreciate this. This is a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure our panelists will respond to it. So we, again, very much appreciate your effort. Can we get our slides up for our next presenter? And I'll ask Doug Holcomb, Executive Director of Greater Bridgeport Transit, to give your thoughts and then respond to this.
Sure. Again, my name is Doug Holcomb with Greater Bridgeport Transit, and I think I have about 8 slides to share with you about what's going on in the Bridgeport region, and I think they touch upon a lot of what's been mentioned this morning and some of the progress that's been made in the area of access to jobs and the use of new technologies, and even I spent a little time on some system restructuring that we did back in 2007, so if we can go to the next slide. I could have shared with you our system map, which you can find on our website, but what I wanted to share with you here was a little bit more of a regional perspective where Bridgeport Transit sits in southwestern Connecticut and some of the interregional connections which you may or may not know about. So we're at the center of this, and pardon me for turning away from the mic, and it's a system of 19 local and express routes operating 365 days a year, slightly pared back on Saturdays, a little bit more pared back on Sundays and holidays, operating from early 4:30 in the morning till almost midnight. It's a very busy service in a very dense urban area with high ridership. We have connections to Milford and Norwalk that we operate jointly with the transit operations there. We have service now into the 25 and 111 corridors and also up into Shelton and Derby. Most of these connections, these Norwalk, Milford, Shelton, have been funded through Department's Investment in Jobs Access and Reverse Commute projects. They were all over the last decade designed to bring people to work, and that's really what they're doing. I think it's noteworthy that when you get to either end of what the Coastal Link is here, you can connect to the New Haven Division and the Stamford Divisions of Connecticut Transit, and from Norwalk on the Route 7 link you can get onto Danbury. So there's lots of interregional connections I don't think everybody's aware of. In terms of ridership, and I'll share more details system-wide for us, but in the Coastal Link corridor, we're looking now at 1.2 million boardings in that section every year. In the area up into Shelton and Derby, those jobs access services are now providing around 340,000 boardings a year between Bridgeport and Derby. And the newer services up to the 111 corridors and 25, about 25,000 boardings a year, but it's noteworthy there that those are very small. One of them is 2 trips in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. The kind of, I think, beginner services that we'd like to expand, and we know that there's new ridership up there. So that's really, I just want to explain a little bit about the regional network. Where you see the white connections, those are places where either planning has already been done to add new links, or it's underway. It's getting underway. So, the next slide, thank you. Do I do that myself? Okay. A little bit about transportation to work, and we had some opportunities on separate projects to ask people why they were using the buses, and you would guess intuitively that most people are using it for the same reason someone would get into the car most of the time going to work. So there's a high number of those. On the left of the slides here is a part of a survey that is underway now, so it's not that many people, but it's live, and we're doing it as part of a transit-oriented development pilot project in the region. But we're asking people, what are you using the service for? And it's no surprise that many of them are talking about work, and then after that, shopping, medical appointments, and other things like that. But we also did, in support of investment that the DSS has been making in the Coastal Link operation, surveys on Coastal Link riders. Service for the Coastal Link riders, where we asked about 700 of them, 90% were using them to go to work. So it's really no surprise, and it's an important part in all of these new jobs access services. I say new, many of them are a decade old, but they have moved from a pilot project into a core part of the transit systems, and I think that's true in many other parts of the state. Next, please. One of the things they asked me to talk about was how we engage the community, and it used to be 10 years ago we had schedules and maps, and that's what we shared with everybody. That really was the extent of it. Once in a while there'd be a press release, once in a while there'd be some outreach that we would do, but today we're doing a lot more of that. We're using the website, and I'll share some information about that. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and those are not for everybody, but they're working for some of our riders. And one of the most important elements of those two are that we're being followed now. We have 600 followers on Twitter. Many of them are media outlets, and we're over the last year retweeted 99 times. And so it's an important way, one of many ways to reach out to people. I think that's important technology. Facebook too, we don't have that many followers. We're approaching 1,200, but the people that are following us stay with us. They like it. They use it during emergencies. I know 1,400 isn't very high. My daughter, when I was preparing this, told me that there's apparently a yodeling pickle on Facebook that has more people than that. So that's national priorities are what they are. We're still engaging people that way. We do a lot of work in person. I think it's important to work. We're working with CT Rides and others to go out to the businesses, Sikorsky, other folks in the community, always out in the community. We do radio when we have the opportunity. A lot of people still depend on the print, and we're doing that. We have a newsletter now with a 600 circulation. We do text alerts, and we have trip planning on the website. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was the live tracking. So all of these things contribute to encouraging people to ride. Everybody has a different idea how they want to receive their information. Another question from that same survey, and this is just coincidental. It's just up for a month now, but I figured I would share it with you. This has to do with asking people how they want to access transit information. And the top one you're seeing is a website or a computer. Below that is a more responsive website. And below that is an application, and then there's a printed schedule. And so the answer to how do you prefer to access transit information is yes, all of those ways. Everybody, again, has a different idea. So we won't be going down the road of just a website. We'll be working to make ours more responsive. Ours is 2009 and probably considered clunky by today's websites, and still continue with the printed materials. Whenever we do public outreach, we always do seat drops. We're on the radio. We're doing scrolling signs, but people who walk into the events are always carrying the paper seat drops that we have. So that's still an important part of it. So the website use, it's become a real important part of our service. It had about 1 million sessions over the last year. And the thing that's important in this slide that I wanted to point out was that when we started it in 2010, about 36% of the people accessing this site were using a mobile device. That number's way up now, 85 and growing. So our riders have mobile devices. And another survey question from the TOD project, we asked people, do they have a smartphone? I didn't include it in here. 80% of them have a smartphone, so lots and lots of people. And that's something to consider how they get their information, especially real-time information, weighing against the expense, the capital expense of putting new signs in all over the place where you could use those at certain places and depend more on the mobile information. And another thing I wanted to share is just some simple elements of the website. This is probably the most visited part of it. That's just going right to the schedule that you want. Here is where you can see the buses in real time, and I'll talk about that more. And here's where you'd go if you want to plan a trip. I think it looks pretty straightforward. We stole it from Virgin Airlines, the general layout of that. If you get on their planes, it'll be what would you like to eat? Would you like to listen to the radio, and so on. But that's generally where that came from. We can go to the next one. Just very briefly, and I hope it's not too sophomoric, but I wanted to give a little bit of background of the technology that's on board the buses that allows us to do service planning in a way we never did it before, and also allows us to share information with the riders. So a typical bus is going to have a GPS system on it. It'll have interior monitor, what's called a mobile data computer for a driver, telling the driver where she is ahead of schedule or behind schedule in her schedule. There's exterior audio announcements, so when that door opens up and there's someone maybe with a visual impairment, it's going to say, this is Route 8 going to the Westfield Mall. There's automatic passenger counters on both the doors, not on every bus, but about half the fleet now. And then there's interior audio and scrolling stops telling people where on. So that's some of what the customer gets. And in the other slides, I'll talk a little bit more about what the customer gets, a little bit about what our planning people have, and a little bit about what our operations people have. So this is WebWatch. This is live tracking of the bus system. The background of this is really, it's a DOT-sponsored project. Pilot project. It was the first deployment of bus transit, intelligent transportation systems in the state. It was scoped by the department. They chose Bridgeport, I think, for a number of reasons. One, because the radio infrastructure. I think another one might have been the overall compact size of it, and then the fact that we're operating both demand response, paratransit service, and fixed route. But in any case, what you go to on our website, if you want to see the live information, is you can see spatially. You just select the route here. It shows you, and it's kind of intuitive, I think, but basically it's showing you where the buses are. These red dots are the time points for Route 8. And then if you wanted to turn on the minor stops, it'll show every stop. And if you click on that, it'll tell you the next 3 crossings in real time of the buses that are operating in the system at any given time. Or you could choose to view it just by the schedules, by the stop. So you pick Route 8. I'm going northbound. I want to know when the bus is going to be at the Clifford House, and the system's going to tell you, based on the actual position of the buses in the system at that time, when the next crossings are. So if you want, you can get an email alert, sign up. You can sign up for a notification, start an account. Doesn't cost anything, and it'll just send your email to you at your breakfast table telling you that these are when your buses are arriving. And a fourth way that people can get information from the system is by on-street signs, which we have at the bus terminal in downtown Bridgeport at all 17 bays. So that's telling you the next couple arrivals, departures rather, of the buses. So that's one of the things that the customer can get. In terms of service planning, the automatic passenger counters yield a lot of information that allow us to reallocate resources regularly. So the Deputy Commissioner, I think, is right. It's very difficult to touch anything in our system without impacting a lot of people. But we do constantly review it. We look at where people are boarding and alighting by time of day. This particular map shows you only stops with activity of greater than 50 people. That's our terminal. That's a hub at the Trumbull Mall. And these are important stops on Main Street and along the coastal link. You can see where the activity is and where it isn't. And we can do that by time of day, by trip. And it's a tool where we collect information inside of 3 weeks that used to take 4 to 6 months to get. And it's more accurate than it was before. So that's something that helps us to refine the system. Day to day, our dispatchers are sitting at a console looking at what's happening. They're not just sitting behind a radio. Now they have information. This happens to be what's called route ladders. And so this is, I'll take this one for example. This is our Route 10. This is every major time point. They would match what you would see in the timetable if you were a rider. The dispatchers know what those abbreviations are. This happens to be yesterday morning. These are the locations of the bus. Green's on time. Blue is a little bit ahead of schedule, and red is behind schedule. This tells you that bus is 8 minutes behind schedule. So dispatchers are managing headway because no matter how good the technology is and the applications are, behind all that has to be a system that's working for them. And that's what this data helps us to do. So we've been using that. Another thing it helps us to do is we can look at on-time performance, and we can look at how long it's taking buses over and over again to do the same thing, find out, for example, what the 95th percentile might be, and then adjust the time that the bus has to ensure better schedule adherence. So we're doing a lot of work in that area. So this is kind of an ugly slide, I know, but what I wanted to share with you here is this is Bridgeport and Stratford and Fairfield. There's a heck of a lot going on here right now, and we're in the middle of a transit-oriented development pilot project that's it's with the department, the town of Stratford, the city of Bridgeport, the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council, Bridgeport Transit, all kinds of neighborhood revitalization organizations are participating in this. And really what we're looking at is what's the development going to be, where is it going to be, where will there be transit-supported densities, what's the mode split going to be for bus transit, and how can we ensure that the transit systems are in place that need to be in place to meet the needs of that growth, and so that we can meet some of those other major goals. So that this project happens to be a compilation of 5 different funding sources: Federal Transit Administration, Connecticut Department of Transportation, some from the city of Bridgeport, Stratford, and Greater Bridgeport Transit as well. Is that 5? There may be more than that. In any case, there's a lot of different agencies. But you can see the size of this Steel Point development, which is right in the midst of infrastructure improvement from a Tiger grant that the city received, and the GE site, Lake Success, the old Army engine plant, and many others. So there's a lot going there, and as a transit agency, we're doing everything we can to be participating in how that land use is taking place. And I think I have just 1 or 2 more slides.
We need to wrap it up.
Sure. That's our ridership. I won't spend much time on that, but there's been steady growth for the last 5 years. This is an estimate, which I would consider to be conservative, and just the next slide will be an indication of the productivity. Well, the slide before that indicates there's no new service services put in place for this ridership. This is more people taking the same buses that are there. And on the last slide, so in terms of technology, certainly it's a big part of what transit agencies are doing. Yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic what comes out with Fast Track, and we'll be watching that because we know we'll have some catch up to do there. There's some capital expenses associated with it that have to be considered when we're planning. We're considering mobile applications, but the first step for us is going to be a more responsive website. So all of that is really couched on top of fare structure. As was said before, the condition of the equipment, engaging the community, all those other things that make for a sound, reliable, clean, efficient transit system. So, thanks.
Good. Thank you very much. I would invite the audience to get your questions ready, and Mary will be circulating again. If you don't have cards, put up your hands, and we'll get you cards, and then we'll be taking those later. Doug Housleden from New Haven is going to be giving us a brief comment next on what's going on in New Haven.
Thank you so much. And I should be the first to admit that I'm not actually in operations. I don't have a transportation background. My background's in molecular biophysics, biochemistry. I'm a data-driven research scientist that has gotten into politics and advocacy through wanting to bike and walk to work. I live downtown. I work downtown. I do everything in downtown New Haven. In 2008, we had an unfortunate pedestrian accident where a peer of mine was killed, and from there launched the rest of my career, which is 6 years to today when Mayor Harp has appointed me. CT Transit runs our bus service in our neck of the woods in Connecticut, and I see a lot of partners here. Greater New Haven Transit District is here. CT Transit operations from Connecticut. Well, my department's in charge of is putting up bus stops and putting up signs. So as far as operations are concerned with respect to our transit systems, we don't have a whole lot to do with it at the City of New Haven. We're an advocacy organization when it comes to working with our partners at CT Transit, and we're also a bit of a planning agency when it comes to our transportation. I'd like to speak a little bit about what other systems what other people and technology is doing. I'm a former technology co-founder of a firm in Connecticut, and what I've seen in other parts of our country that are really interesting is what New York is doing with their telephone booths, making them mobile hotspots and making them free telephone calls, and being very much attractive as a signage in order to get more people into using their systems. Other things we've seen, of course, Houston reimagining is the dream. We are launching, as was mentioned by Bill Villano, a $1 million planning study, an FTA alternatives analysis. Again, it's the Greater New Haven Transit District as the lead on the project, and Connecticut DOT is sponsored with $100,000. What we're looking at is really thinking of how we can do the same that Houston did. We have, as you saw earlier, 100% access to transit in New Haven. What is not necessarily 100%, again, is the frequency, the service, or the access to the jobs. So 30% of our jobs are accessible by transit, and that, to me, is why Mayor Harp has appointed me as somebody that I appreciate very well. We need to get our people in New Haven back to work and get them to the jobs that are being created. And that's a number of issues, stemming from planning, economic development, and everything. I'm a little bit different than most transportation departments. I'm not a maintenance shop. I'm not a public works shop. I'm actually part of the economic development team in New Haven. And being a hub for transportation for the region and for New England, we are key to creating economic prosperity for Connecticut. The governor knows that and has spent a lot of time in Connecticut talking about Metro North, talking about the New Haven Hartford high-speed rail, and has also sponsored our FTA alternatives analysis again. So some things that we're doing in order to better service our transportation networks entirely. Of course, if we can improve our roads, we can improve our bus service. But we have, just for understanding, not everyone's from New Haven, 6,500 people per square mile. So our density is fairly dense. We're about 19 square miles. We're a fairly flat town. So having multimodal transportation options is really key to not only reducing our capacity, or not only reducing our congestion and increasing capacity, but also creating a more sustainable and healthy lifestyle for our residents. One thing that I always talk about is, and you saw it in the Houston slides, is how far people have to walk to get to a bus stop. The average transit user walks about 17 minutes per occasion of use. That times 2 for to and from work is 34 minutes. That's over the daily recommended cardio exercise. So actually, by being a transit rider, you have lower BMI and you actually have lower rates of cardiovascular issues. Some of the other things we are doing currently in New Haven is changing our zoning to reduce our parking requirements, increasing our TDM planning. You've heard a lot about CT rides and New Ride. Alexion Pharmaceuticals is coming in and sponsored our Gateway Community College bus passes this year to the tune of a $24 a month funding source. And so our Gateway Community College is creating a very large congestion point for our system, but if we can get more and more of our students to use transit, then everyone sort of wins. And Alexion gets that, being the fact that they are actually on Route 34 in downtown New Haven and are going to be affected the most by that traffic. Some other things just to point out, the millennial generation, of which I'm a member, just on the tail end I have to admit, is the largest generation in America. And as we heard earlier, what freedom means to millennials is different what it means to baby boomers, the second largest generation. Baby boomers really valued a private car. Millennials really value the freedom to get from A to B without the economic impact of having to own that car. And so what we're doing in New Haven is preparing for a retiring generation that is the largest, that was at one point the largest in the country, while also trying to attract the next generation that's the largest currently, millennials. And we do that through engineering, education, and enforcement to help build our complete streets networks, provide transportation alternatives for our residents, and hopefully attract more tech jobs with, if anybody in the room's heard of our gigabit internet effort being led by a few towns in Connecticut, of which New Haven is one. So things that we're doing inside of the department and inside of City Hall to sort of change the nature of, as Christoph mentioned, once you get off the bus, what environment are you in? We've changed zoning to increase sidewalk space in our BD3 zone in the downtown. We're employing tactical urbanism, and we're going to be launching 30 complete streets projects in the spring with my city engineer, Giovanni Zen, another millennial, as it turns out, who is also seeing the fact that we need to do more and more places for lower dollars. And so we're looking for more ways to do that. And we are hamstrung occasionally by state statutes, which we're working on through our legislative delegation. But we're also sort of hamstrung by this fear of trying new things. And I think what we're hiring Mike Leiden out of New York, a consultant that really focuses on tactical urbanism. We're willing to risk $2,000 and fail. No one's willing to risk $2 million on a transportation project and fail. So we're going to be trying and testing our solutions to have really data-driven projects in our future. One last thing is we've heard of the TOD from New Haven Hartford High-Speed Rail with respect to another town north of us. We just recently applied for TOD planning grant through Connecticut DOT for the area within a quarter mile of our Chapel Street train station. We have 2 train stations in the downtown, and really we need to do more with that in order to really drive economic development. We've got about 1,500 housing units being built right now within a quarter mile of the Chapel Street train station. We have a mobility study from the Parking Authority of all people. Our Parking Authority has run a mobility study for the medical district area. On Monday, I invite everyone to join us at Career High School at 5 o'clock. We're going to have a professional speed walker, I'm not joking, come down and do a neighborhood walking tour entitled "Why Can't the Chicken Cross the Road?" Because you need to do more once people get off the bus in order to incentivize the whole picture of transit. You saw the Houston Road with 2 lanes in each direction and a suicide lane, and there's a reason they're called suicide lanes, right? Finally, I just want to mention that this can't happen without a lot of top-down leadership, and Mayor Harp has been very much key and integral to all of this. Her quote, and I finally stopped all my Twitter notifications, again, technology, to finally read the rest. It's transportation is a civil rights issue, it's an economic development issue, and it's a jobs issue. Too many residents in our community struggle to find suitable transportation to get to work, to a doctor's appointment, or to the grocery store. With better public transportation, we can work to ensure better quality of life for residents, particularly economically vulnerable families and seniors. And that's really what our job should be about and has to be about. One way that from my leadership and what we've been doing from our department is we sponsored an X Prize for an open source GPS tracking system that we were able to complete through Hackathon by leveraging our technology and our developers in our city. And we completed that development of that in June, and we'll be launching that once I get through purchasing, which has taken 4 months to buy 2 Verizon units. Right? Tell me about it, Mike. Once we get through purchasing, we'll have that deployed hopefully sometime in January. CT Transit has been so kind to offer the downtown free shuttle as a pilot, as a temporary thing until we get our GPS on buses, coming from the CT Fast Track contract. It's been fantastic working with our partners. We've got 2 buses in the downtown free shuttle. Hopefully we'll get those 2 on an open source tracking system. Just from a technology co-founder, and then I'll wrap up, Lyle. I know I'm over time. Some questions I have about technology and transportation in Connecticut are really quite unanswered for me. And I hope to actually come away with this panel with answers. Are we doing an open fare box system so that we can use the same card in Connecticut as we do in New York? Are we using an open GTFS data so that any developer, just like the Chicago MTA and Boston, any developer can jump on and develop a transit app that people can use, or are we only using closed source systems? Can we, in the state of Connecticut, have a statewide bike share contract where the city of New Haven can jump onto? And finally, but I know we're trying. And last but not least, how can we do better with purchasing in general? I appreciate that we're jumping on the CT Transit systems, getting GPS on our buses because of the CT Fast Track contract. But must we wait until the end of the project to see the rest of the system improved? And how can we use more? The reason I always harp on GPS is a Science article that came out the week of my appointment that said that real-time transit information can actually increase transit customer satisfaction by 70% while only actually decreasing the travel time by 2%. So we can do more bang for our buck by just doing these little tweaks and get more riders onto the system so we can actually have a better system for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Last but not least, the transit administrator for the state, Michael Sanders.
Doug's answers are yes, yes, no, maybe, and we'll talk about purchasing later.
And you're a millennial too, I think, Mike.
I'm the last millennium. Yeah.
Me too.
Hitting cleanup or batting cleanup for a technology session, I'm going to start and say that technology isn't all it's cracked up to be. I was a city boy. By the time I was 11 years old, I was taking the train and the subway to the Polo Grounds. For those who don't remember, that's where the New York Giants baseball team used to play. But the New York Mets played there for the first year or two that they were formed back in '62 and '63. So that gives you the idea of what decade, at least, if not what millennium. But there wasn't a lot of technology back then. It was a need to go someplace or a desire to go someplace, and you got someplace, and there had to be the service in place. So Doug's last slide of it all depends on having service there and well-maintained vehicles and everything else. All the technology in the world won't solve any of those problems for you. I'm glad I didn't do a PowerPoint because between the Deputy Commissioner and Doug Holcomb and all my slides would be duplicative anyway. But the department and its transit arm, CT Transit, as well as the New Haven Line and Shoreline East, all have always had a long commitment to technology. It's been tied in through clean fuels for a long time. I find it ironic that one of the first technology projects we did was lining bus cylinders with ceramics to see if we could reduce the particulate matter. Probably that would have reduced it by about 1%, and now we probably only emit 1% of the particulate matter we used to emit back in the early 90s. So some technology jumps way faster than even we can plan for it. But we're also committed in a lot of other ways to both clean technology like fuel cells, as well as hybrid buses. We were the largest user of biofuels in the state for a while, until the diesel fuel got so clean that we don't need to use the biofuels at that level anymore. So I'm going to talk a little bit about system-wide technology, a little about CT Fast Track technology, and then something called T-Hub, which most of you have probably never heard of.